So our next speakers in our afternoon session are Ivan Ninichuck and Andy Shepard from Siemplify. So this proposal intrigued us with its musical metaphor and the idea of turning numerous data sources into an orchestra. Ivan's been our dedicated question asker and lightning talk speaker to ATT&CKcon in the past, so great to see you here for a main track talk. So please give it up for Ivan and Andy.
Okay, so first I do have to give a disclaimer. All opinions and ideals are solely our own and our particular small little team. They don't exactly, they're not official views or any timelines or anything for either Siemplify or Google Cloud. Andy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yep. Hi guys, Andy Shepard. Been in SOAR for a few years, which is why we're doing the talk today. But like many of you, been in IT cyber for much longer. There's much more to say, really.
Ivan Ninichuck, totally forgot to put my social media out there, but I made it easy for everyone. It's just my name, like everywhere. So just Google my name, you'll find it. Freelancer, tech writer, got hired by Siemplify, doing SOAR now. So good times. Now, one thing, no one works in a vacuum. We basically came at Siemplify and we wanted to find out what were the great ways of applying automation to MITRE ATT&CK, how to get this done. And so what I did once I met this wonderful gentleman was we put together a small team, and I just want to make sure that they're all recognized in their contributions. Okay, so I started out almost at least a year ago or so. And the first place that we started our discussion was, how do you see your data sets? And I want to share how I see the data sets and how we see them. We see them as an orchestra, all playing those very well-known symphonies. Like imagine something from Mozart or Beethoven playing, or Tchaikovsky, depending on what your favorites are. But this is how security feels when you don't have ATT&CK, right? We all got that down. But we still, so ATT&CK brings the clarity, the order and everything that the music does. It gives us our notes and our language that we're speaking. We'll get to that a little more. But the problem is that when you have an orchestra, even if you're all trying to play the same notes, you're not necessarily going to play them all at the same time. If you get an orchestra without a conductor, then guess what happens? Everyone plays a different part at a different tempo in a different key, and it's just noise. And that's what we see data sets when they're not being correlated properly, when they're not using ATT&CK to guide the investigations, things like that. We see it as just noise happening. And so SOAR really stands in the industry in an interesting spot. Obviously, it's been one of the kind of buzzwords maybe in the past. You heard, hey, SOAR this, SOAR that. And so we really wanted to address that and just, put the position of where it stands in our mind with all the other tools that we work with and how we see it really. And so I actually did take a diagram of an orchestra and then put all the tools out there, because this is seriously how I see things. Like when I've been listening to music, and I literally see like the pianos are my fishing data, right? Giving me my initial access. The violins are my network and endpoint, and they're playing a certain tune. And now I can see how the two are interjecting each other and playing. So now the question is, we got this ideal of the orchestra. We got this ideal that, ATT&CK's a good thing and provides this ability to orchestrate. But how do we automate this thing? How do we actually make it usable on a day-to-day? And this is where I have been ecstatic more than ever by any ATT&CK thing, which was the data sources and data components. Yes. So, and what I began to realize was we really did create literally the Rosetta Stone of security languages. And I know I've heard this several times in other presentations, this idea that it's a language and we've been creating it and now we can use it. Well, one thing is that I was investigating the Rosetta Stone, for this presentation. And one of the interesting things about it was how it brought out biases in the way that different scholars approached ancient civilizations and how that brought out different uses of the Rosetta Stone and different conclusions. So I really began to see this correlation between what we do with ATT&CK and how this works. Now, how do I automate this thing? Well, the cool thing is that because I have these data components and because they're in this language that's tied to these techniques and the detections have these same techniques in them, now I can start automating where am I going to take this investigation next? Where do you need, when you have a data component, say about a registry key being created, where else do I need to start looking? Maybe I need to start following Olaf's suggestions and start looking at user creation. Maybe I need to start looking, say, if an Active Directory data component comes up, look at similar logs. And these are the kind of things that now we can start doing. Because I want to present an ideal. And the ideal is that time is your utility in SecOps. And it has different cost based on when you're using it. If you're using it, say, during detection engineering periods or threat hunting periods, time costs less. You have more time to do your job. If you're that SOC analyst on the day-to-day and the incident's happening now, your time costs more. It takes more resources, it's burning people out more. So we need to make sure that we're getting the results when time costs less, but during the periods when time costs more. Now, some of the tools that we started using to do this, and I really want to give a shout out to CTID. I've been just amazed at how much I've seen this grow over the last couple of years from when, Richard came up and announced it to where it is today. There's just the amount of projects. So one thing we did was we needed a place where we could start putting this information and where we could start tweaking the framework. And I hope you've all taken a look, and if you haven't, you can do so after this, at the ATT&CK workbench. Because basically it allows you to work, in naturally with the sticks objects and be able to customize things, create your own relations. It has an area for notes where you expand. It's very useful, and it has an a REST API that comes with it. So they literally did all the hard work for us. And so we were able to use that REST API to automate a lot of this interaction and to automate the, keeping the collection sorted. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Thank you very much. Which one's the non-laser? Oh, top one.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so just a 30-second overview of SOAR. I know it's a kind of new technology, not everyone's come across it yet. Just one slide. The point of SOAR, and the kind of area I work in, is something I can empathize quite well because I come from a SOC background, is we ingest alerts, whether that's through SIEM, technology directly, whether it's via case management, a phone call, email, that kind of thing. We bring it in and we basically normalize it. We pass it through a playbook. The playbook can be anything. It can do anything. It will talk to the rest of your kit, and it will do asset lookups, threat lookups, historical data lookups, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, on the right-hand side, we present you a case view. So the idea is, instead of logging in and seeing a log line and, this is what I'm going to do for the next 40 seconds of copy, paste, alt tab, here is a colorful, populated, executive report for an analyst to say, right, I understand the case, I understand all the relations, all the context, let's go straight to the decision making. So with a even quicker than an elevator pitch on what SOAR is, how do we start using MITRE? So really, I suppose for me, my 5 or 6 minutes of fame today here on the stage is to say, thanks to the MITRE team, I love ATT&CK, I love what it does. But also a bit of a thank you to all vendors that actually put the ATT&CK codes in, because that's what I want to look at today, is how are we consuming alerts and turning that into something useful, really. So the first thing we do, quite standard really, is a simple case level enrichment. So on the left, our alert had the MITRE code in, and on the right, let's give the analyst a nice pretty version of the mitigations, the explanation. Here's a hard link so you can start pivoting it and searching. So for me, this is quite simple. I consider this a whoop, question mark. It's kind of cool. But I think where it gets a little bit more exciting is where we look at the way that different technologies do case grouping. And for us, that's basically many ways we do it, but one of those ways is looking at the entities. So in this case on the left, we actually have the explorer view of a particular case. And in this case, without going too much into the details, we had 3 alerts on the right. The first one is an out-of-hours logon for one of the users, so logging in at a suspicious time. The second one was actually a network protocol violation, so someone's trying to use IRC or someone is using IRC. The third one was a malware alert, so something a bit like an AV. It could be a DLP, it could be IPS, it could be a phone call, it can be absolutely anything. But as those alerts come to a SOAR platform, what we can do is start to look at those and say, well, actually, they've all got a bit in common. Maybe this is a story, a case. So and on the right-hand side, we can see that each one of those alerts has an attack ID, which is fantastic. But even if we have to add that by hand, it still works. If we then go and do enrichments and add it later on, it still works. But like I said, in the ideal world, I'd like to see every alert with an attack ID in, and that really helps with what we do next. So the first thing we basically put in at the POC level a while ago was mapping that to the framework, because if we're now automatically grouping all the alerts, and when an analyst comes in, grabs coffee, 8 o'clock in the morning, sits down, they open the first case, straight away, they can see that kind of dynamic alignment to the framework. So straight off, what have we detected? If the detections come to us, then actually that's not that bad because we spotted it, so we'll rate that as an amber. If in this case we don't have the detection, that's going to be a red. And if it's after the latest detection, then it may not have happened, so we'll leave that as an undetected. So this was the first thing we put in. So the first thing you do, you open a case, okay, I can understand where we are, where we're blind, maybe where I want to go proactively hunting next. What we then started to do was take that a bit stronger by actually starting to put, where do you think your environment is strong? Where do you think your mitigations are? Obviously, no mitigation is always 100%. We have to play it safe. So in this case, we could configure an environment to say, this is where we think we're mitigated. And then the next thing was to take the last image, the kind of very high level, and start actually making it look a little bit more like attack, so people are a bit more familiar with it, filling out the columns. Probably needs a little bit more CSS, needs to be a little bit shinier. But there you can see that in this particular case, we had all the different IDs, and so we're mapping that in. So again, as the analyst comes in, I can see not only where we've had the visibility, but where we've had the visibility and we think we've got mitigations in play. So that was one of the next things we did. Now at this point, I started to think, wouldn't it be really good if we could start to not predict where those spots are, where we've not had the visibility, but maybe there's a machine learning way to look at the most likely place to start searching. And I started having a chat with Ivan. He said, have you not heard of MITRE sightings? I was like, no, I have not. So we started looking into that. And it was absolutely a perfect fit. So what we're doing there, and this is, as Ivan said, this is not a roadmap. This is just a concept we're kind of playing with now. So big shout out to MITRE for all the new things they're doing. But it is a way to basically say, right, here are all the different campaigns. Here's all the sightings of attack IDs together. So here we can see we've got 2 campaigns listed, and then comparing what we found against that. So in this case, just using the sample data we found on, I think it's the GitHub page, we can see that the ABC 987 had 1 out of 2 hits, and we can start to see that. And then maybe the DT 1234 had none out of 3 hits. So as that data set gets bigger, as we're dynamically pulling that in, we can start to, as you hover over them, color in all the red spots of maybe where you want to go hunting. So I think that'd be a great one. Obviously, as the data set gets bigger, we can start to make more value out of that. And then really to close that off, and again, this is just something we're playing with, is basically the feedback loop. So we consume the data, we apply it to all the cases as they come in, as they're grouped, as we present it to the analyst. But then when we go to close the case, we're going to assume that that is the maximum visibility you've got. So maybe there's a level of sanitization, maybe we can push it back. And then maybe that feeds back into the circle. So hopefully, one day in the future, we could be here showing you that working in action. If we can get that into the further up into the devs and get the company in with that. So that's something we're playing with. But yeah, I just thought I'd show you where we're going with it and how I think it could be really useful. Thank you very much.
I gotta say, this was one of our, one of our favorite submissions, just because of the creativity and how much went into the theme of this. So thank you so much. I think we have time for one question, and I had it on the tip of my tongue the entire talk, and you addressed it towards the end. But one of the things we've seen is really important with, exactly as you said, with enrichments and kind of exactly what you were highlighting, the problem of keeping all the instruments in the orchestra, in tune and aligned. How, closing that feedback loop, what any advice there in terms of, are there particular questions? Is it side-saddling your analysts to see how they respond to things? Or how does one really make sure that, we're pushing something and this is kind of the visualization and what we expect, that we really are, tuning that over time?
I'll take that. I really think it comes down to, what's been brought up before, which is you want to start thinking about things, risk-based to your environment. One thing I'm really big about is looking at what you're detecting, what you might not be detecting, compared to say what vulnerabilities you might have in your in your environment, making sure you have your asset inventories, and then being able to make those risk scores, suggestions when you're trying to triage and when you're trying to do those things. So that's my biggest, is know your environment, know what tools you have, and then find the gaps where you may not have the coverage, but make sure that you're looking at that vulnerability, that asset inventory, because if in the end, if you're not making decisions based on your risk, then you're not making decisions for your own company or whoever you're servicing. You're just making random decisions, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, random can go very wrong. Thank you.